Hello everybody, I'm Pontius Porcius and welcome back again to Unexpected Awesome. Growing up, one of my favorite genres of movie was the Western, and while many agree that the golden age of the Western was the 1930s through the 1960s, with a small silver age coming out of Italy and of course Clint Eastwood in the 1970s, undoubtedly one of the most overlooked and underappreciated decades in the genre is the 1990s. While many may point to Unforgiven as the pinnacle of that genre in the 1990s, in my opinion, one of the finest achievements inside of the Western, not just in the 1990s, but across the entirety of the history of the genre, is none other than 1990's Quigley Down Under by Simon Windsor. Quigley Down Under opens up with American sharpshooter and buffalo hunter Matthew Quigley landing at port in northern Australia, where he meets a band of ruffians trying to proposition a young lady. He then teaches them some manners with his backhand, and then comes to the realization that they're the people sent to pick him up for his new employer in Australia. After allowing the cinematographer to flex his capable skill across the screen by showing them trek across the magnificent vistas of the Australian outback, they make it to Marston's ranch, where the wealthy landowner, Elliot Marston, challenges Quigley to a long-range marksmanship challenge to see if his claims of pipping the ace at 900 yards multiple times in a row is in point of fact true. After using his mobile Leopold gun that he happened to strap a buttstock to crater a bucket across the breadth of the outback, Marston finds his claims sufficiently proven and finds himself sufficiently impressed. Being a student of dime novels in the Old West, what is claimed to be of the Old West, Marston then tries to show off to Quigley by challenging a British Army deserter to a pistol duel, to which he then guns him down with his magnificent quick draw. Later that night, Marston is entertaining Quigley at supper, desperately trying to impress him, but also revealing to him the real reason for his employment there. He needs Quigley to help him wage a pogrom on Aboriginals living on his land, not wanting to be part of a racial cleansing. Quigley then tosses Marston out of his own house, to which he then tries to go right back in and teach Quigley a lesson. However, being a true red-blooded American dude with a functioning mustache, he then tosses Marston right back out of his house again. Before he can gear up for a full-on range war with the small army that Marston has on hand, the Aboriginal butler decides to kung fu Quigley into submission. After being beaten and then dragged out into the middle of the desert with the crazy lady whose honor he defended on the docks, it seems like all is lost for Quigley and Crazy Cora. However, he manages to lure one of the henchmen back with the promise of the bonus that he was paid just for showing up to Marston's ranch. After shanking that dude and getting his rifle back from him, the other henchman that was sent to dump him out in the middle of the desert tries to run away. He failed to understand the mortar cannon mastery that Quigley showed earlier on, and then proceeds to get moved across the map. Now, with nothing but very little water and a gun, Cora and Quigley try to make their way back to civilization on foot before they find themselves sufficiently defeated by the outback, exhausted, dehydrated, and essentially fainted into the ground. All seems lost yet again for our main protagonists. However, the Aboriginals Quigley was initially hired to ventilate from across long distances, then find what seems to be left of Quigley and Cora, and they nurse them back to health. After coming to and learning some valuable lessons about living off the land from the Aborigines, all seems pretty right in the world. Things seem like they're going to be going on their way up, and Quigley seems like he's going to be able to go back home. It's at this point that Cora decides to open up to Quigley about her past and her life story. It's at that moment that Quigley discovers that the Aboriginals are being chased and thrown off a cliff by Marston's henchmen. He then takes his mobile Napoleonic cannon and then proceeds to crater that dude from beyond the vista. He then goes to the wheezing remains of what's left of Marston's henchmen and then gives him an ultimatum. Tell him where civilization and Marston's ranch is, or he's going to let the Australian wildlife have a very loud dinner. Not wanting to feel the circle of life at work, the henchman tells Quigley where civilization is and where Marston's ranch is. Cora inspects the remains of the Aborigines, overcome with anger and grief at the loss of innocent life when she discovers the sole survivor, an Aboriginal babe. Taking the guns and horse from Marston's now deceased henchman, Quigley takes Cora to a cave where he entrusts her with both the infant and a firearm to fight off any potential threats while he fetches supplies and help. He then proceeds to jet off to the nearest civilization that the henchman told him about to purchase supplies and that sweet experimental ammunition for his railroad cannon of a rifle. The German dude helping Quigley decides to send his son to corral Quigley's horse, which is then noticed by some of Marston's henchmen that just happen to be in that town. Noticing the distinctive saddle that Quigley has in a British-occupied country, they follow the boy back to the house where Quigley is taking shelter and attack it and light it on fire. However, little do they know that Quigley has managed to flank them, manages to split them in half with his mobile mortar cannon, letting the others sprint back to Marston's ranch to instill a sense of terror at the anticipation of the bullet ninja that is Matthew Quigley. Back in the cave, Cora finds that Australian wildlife never sleeps and tries to assault the cave. Terrified that she might accidentally kill a child again, out of fear and terror, she decides to let the child cry as bait, so that way the small swarm of dingoes that desperately wants to eat them sprints forth right into the trap of her bullets. She unleashes a fearsome, fiery, Texan-fueled barrage at these creatures to the point where one of them is wounded. It goes to its friends for help, but finds that their hunger knows no mercy. They then sprint right back into the cave to get some Aboriginal and Texan seconds, only to walk right into another buffet of lead sandwiches. Quigley, after seeing the German dude's wife caught in the crossfire, he then decides to swear vengeance on Marston, vowing to end it once and for all in a climactic duel at his ranch. After being sufficiently impressed with Cora's prowess with a piece, he takes her and the child back to civilization, where they give the Aboriginal baby to another Aborigines so it can be raised among its own people. He then leaves Cora with the German family so that way that nobody else but him is put at risk in the small range war. He then sprints right back out to Marston's ranch. Marston practicing his pistol marksmanship in front of his men, when suddenly the last surviving henchman shows up to forewarn them. Quigley then proceeds to explode two guys with one cannon shell from across the valley. However, this time our antagonists are prepared. They lay suppressing fire, allowing one young Turk within their ranks to flank and kung fu Quigley from behind. They drag him right back to the ranch, where now the only bits that remain of Marston and his ilk are himself and his two most loyal gunzels. Deciding to tip the odds in their favor, but still keep things in the spirit of the Old West that he once read of, Marston decides to strip Quigley of his rifle and hand him a pistol and challenge him to a 3-on-1 pistol duel. Quigley then proceeds to school this wannabe in the actual ways of the Old West by outdueling all three of them at once and sending them off with one of the sickest one-liners in cinema history. The manservant once again shows up, this time armed. Seeming once again to be the odd that tips things against Quigley's favor, he decides to toss the rifle away and washes his hands of Western civilization and walks right back out into the outback to be with his people again. Like the Spanish Inquisition, the British Army shows up, not particularly happy that Quigley is involved with not only the death of one of their wealthiest taxpayers in the district, but also another small pile of dudes. They decide to try to arrest him, to which the Aboriginals that he's befriended along the way show up and intimidate the British Army into letting him go. The film ends with Quigley at the docks where he began the film, trying to buy a ticket to America. However, with the price on his head and the criminal reputation he's now gained, the ticket taker is beginning to become suspicious that this guy might be the sniper that the fat bounty is out on. Decides to take the name of Cora's late husband for the trip back to protect himself and, of course, to officially show that he's going to try to make a go of it with Cora. Suspicion assuaged, they both get a ticket and they go right back on into the great blue yonder. Quigley Down Under is perhaps one of the most unique westerns I think I've ever seen. There's a lot of stuff about it that makes it different from most of your standard westerns, but let's go into the basic narrative ones first, shall we? This film is the direct antithesis to many western films from the golden age of American western cinema, the 30s through the 60s. With a lot of those films, such as Stagecoach, focusing on the taming of the land in the Wild West, this film focuses more on respecting and coming to an understanding with the wilderness and frontier rather than physically taming it, as shown by Quigley befriending the Aborigines and relying on their wisdom to not only survive in the desert, but also to motivate his quest against a corrupted form of quote-unquote American civilization in the Wild West. This film also has some really solid characters. The characters are all archetypes, but they're all really well done. Starting with the main antagonist of the story, Elliot Marston, he's a British descendant Australian land baron whose family was killed by Aboriginals, and having become a student of the American dime novel, he thinks that the best way to solve this, his parents getting murdered in the past, is to master the quick draw, due to his mastery over the revolver and the piles of dime novels that he's read. While he thinks he's adopted the most positive elements of the American adventure heroes from the Western fiction, he's ultimately taken on a lot of their worst traits, including a sense of self-superiority and egotism, as well as a massive racial prejudice against the people that live on his land before him. This assumption of man's superiority over nature finds himself at odds with Matthew Quigley, whose character arc is ultimately coming to respect nature and survive inside of nature, not taming it. This leads to them coming to blows, and like the motion of the ocean against rocks, eventually defeats Marston. Then of course there's Crazy Cora. Crazy Cora may seem like your standard love interest at first, but in reality there's a lot more to her than just that. She's a failed mother and a woman whose mind has been broken by racial prejudices, very similar to that of Marston. See, she actually grew up in the American West. There's a raid on her house by a bunch of Comanche tribals that she thought was there to pillage. However, she discovers that these tribals were in point of fact drunk and just mistook their house for where they were living. Unfortunately for her, inside of the commotion, she accidentally smothered her own son to death. Her husband sends her off to Australia, where he doesn't have to deal with her anymore. It's years before she meets somebody who treats her with any kindness, until Matthew Quigley comes along. Her choice of attaching herself to Quigley because of the kindness that he showed to her at the dock ultimately allows her to atone for her mistake in Texas when she fights her personal demons head-on in the face of the dingoes that swarm the cave to eat the indigenous child. That plot itself is complemented magnificently by great performances, solid dialogue, excellent cinematography, and one of the greatest soundtracks to a Western I think I've ever heard. It rivals Ennio Morricone in terms of quality and distinction, and is composed by none other than sadly late Basil Polidorus. Let's talk about the cinematography. The cinematography in this film is absolutely beautiful and majestic, and the absolutely stunning Australian outback vistas, but also allowing you to see in a lot of beautiful and magnificent detail of the mise-en-scène. Not a frame of this film doesn't look distinctive, not a frame of this film isn't well thought out or well designed. The most distinctive strength that Quigley Down Under has, by and large, is easily its action. For you see, most Westerns, whether it be the Golden Age American Western from the likes of John Ford or Howard Hawks, or the Leone-esque spaghetti Westerns of the 70s, they almost all rely on pistol duels, whether it be tense build-up to chain blue lightning conclusions, or long, drawn-out siege duels. They ultimately rely on the revolver, where quick-draw mastery, ammo capacity, and rate of fire are ultimately the way to victory. This movie, however, doesn't really rely on that. It takes more from the spaghetti western, but it adds a hunter's edge to it. Because Quigley utilizes a single-shot railroad gun, his fights are much more methodical. They're more like well-executed chess matches and traps that he lays with bullets. It means that in each and every moment where he has the preparation, the advantage, and the element of surprise, he can practically ninja people from across the map with his anti-nature tank rifle. However, it also means that he has a distinct disadvantage. For you see, after every single shot, he has to take time to reload and re-aim. This gives his enemies the advantage of being able to get up close to him and utilize that capacity and rate of fire that their pistols have. This is really good for the action of this movie, because it means that both sides have an equal chance of winning. Quigley loses if he gets flanked. However, if his enemies don't know he's there, or that he has the distance advantage, ultimately, it means that the action itself is not only distinctive, but highly dangerous. This movie has some of the most diverse action set pieces in the entire Western genre, and the action set pieces themselves serve as some of the most intriguing and unique firefights I've ever seen. Ultimately, Quigley Down Under is a superbly shot, superbly scored, superbly directed, and superbly acted Western from the last great decade of Westerns. And if a distinctive Western isn't worth your time, then I don't know what as a movie would be worth your time. Pontius Porcius, signing off.
Hey amico,
Ehi amico,
c'è Sabata!
hai chiuso.